Hey everyone, today we are going to be solving Baby on Vulnlab. This is an easy machine which serves as an introduction to Active Directory. If you're looking to pass your OSCP and don't know much about Active Directory, I think that this is a great machine to start with. To begin, we are going to simply run an nmap scan and view the results. Okay, so let's take a look at our nmap scan. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Active Directory, that's okay, but we're going to get familiar really quick here. So this is a domain controller, as we can tell from the nmap scan. Now, how do I know it's a domain controller? Well, there's a few things that give it away. Well, first we have port 88 open, which is Kerberos, which is a pretty dead giveaway. But also we see under port 3389, which is RDP, we have a column name of babydc.baby.bl, with the DC obviously standing for domain controller. Alright, let's take a look at the rest of the nmap scan. Now, it can be very overwhelming, especially when you're starting out, looking at an nmap scan with a lot of results. It's important to keep in mind that a lot of these ports, especially in Active Directory, are going to be kind of ports you can almost ignore off the bat. For example, 88 Kerberos, there's not going to be a lot of unauthenticated exploitation for Kerberos. Similarly, on any domain controller, SMB is going to be open, so 445, 135, and 139. I always take a look to make sure like no authentication is allowed or anything, but that's something that you can pretty much quickly discard after a quick glance over. Same with RDP. You're not really going to find RCE vulnerabilities in RDP. It's important in an actual pen test to actually make sure that everything that's going on through RDP, such as the certificate, is signed and secure. But for OSCP purposes and for CTF purposes, it's likely not going to be one of those paths. 53, we see open with DNS, but we can perform zone transfers with DNS. We might have to explore a bit more to see exactly what DNS service it is and what version it is to see if there's any other exploit paths. LDAP is always interesting to look into. And 464 K password 5 question mark may be a service we need to enumerate more on our own time. With nmap done, we can start mapping out the services that are available to us to attack. So this is kind of like a mind map thing. I do it in my head, I do it in my notes all the time, but I'm just writing it out for everyone to see. And as we go through it, I'll continue to update it with what kind of attack path we go through. We are going to begin by looking at LDAP. A lot of people don't know what LDAP is. It stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, and it's used to access and manage directory services over a network. It's used so system administrators can easily query and modify information in directories for storing information such as user and group data within an organization. Now, LDAP should require authentication. That's very important for it since you don't want any user to view information in there. But it's a really useful tool for system administrators, and it's often used as a directory service protocol. So we're going to use LDAP search to query the LDAP protocol being run on the target machine. So looking at the help page, there are a few things we need to specify. The first one is TAC-X to use simple authentication instead of the security layer authentication. TAC-H is going to be the URL with our default port of 389. TAC-D is used for authentication along with TAC-W. We're doing an anonymous bind, so we're going to be leaving both of these blank here. And then TAC-B is the search base, which is the LDAP directory tree we're going to search, which in our case is baby and VL, which again we saw in our nmap scan. That is the name of the domain. So after we run it, we do see we get some results. So that's always good. So first thing I'm going to do is I am going to go and tee this all out to a file. That way I can have it all locally and start grepping through it with whatever I want. So before I start grepping through, because I know that this is a one domain controller machine, there's not going to be that many results, right? You could WC TAC-L it to see how many lines there are going to be, but I knew it wasn't going to be very big, so I decided just to less the whole thing and start going through it. Now, as I'm going through it, I'm looking for anything of interest, passwords, usernames, anything that may help me get initial access on the machine. So as we can see here, there are a few interesting things such as SIDs, which have some sort of encoding in them. But as I continue to scroll down, there are some useful information here where I see member names and some distinguished names. So that looks like some interesting information I could definitely use to enumerate further. However, as I continue to go through the search results, I do end up finding a SAM account name. Now this SAM account name indicates that this is a Active Directory username, so I can use this to grep for other SAM account names within the LDAP query. So after doing this, I see quite a few SAM account names within there. Now, I don't want, for my purposes here, I don't want domain controllers, domain users, or any of that, because that is going to be a group, and I'm only looking for users because I'm thinking I may use this to password spray or do some other form of initial access using it, and I can't password spray groups obviously in Active Directory. So I'm using awk and grep here to first awk out the same account name, then I notice a pattern that all usernames are using a period, made it easy to grep that out, and then I cut the remaining space at the start of the thing, and from there I put it in a username list. Following that, I look for passwords in the LDAP dump. Grepping for the word password, I identify one of baby start 123 with a shebang. I want to identify who it actually belongs to, so I do a grep TAC-B, which stands for before 20, and find it's Teresa. So now I want to verify that that password is correct for Teresa. So I use crapmapexec SMB, I input the domain controller's IP, I copy over Teresa's name from the username list I grepped out earlier, and I will input the password as well. My crapmapexec actually broke here, so I had to update it quickly, but in that time I will quickly explain what crapmapexec is and why you shouldn't actually use it, as there is a newer tool. So crapmapexec is a very common tool used for testing Active Directory environments. It can be used for password spraying and verifying credentials. However, it's no longer being updated, so the new tool being used is actually netexec. So I'd highly recommend checking out netexec. It has all the same functionality and more, and is going to be updated in the future, unlike crapmapexec. So finally, after getting it updated, I tried the password and I noticed it failed. So obviously Teresa has updated her password since this. So my next thought was to spray all the users with a found password. Oftentimes users will reuse passwords within the Active Directory environment. So first I forgot how to actually call a user list, but it's actually the exact same syntax. As you can see here, TAC-U is username or file. So all I have to do is update that to my user list. After running it, it'll take a little bit, it's a little slow to run, but as you see, everyone gets status logon failure until the very end here, where we actually see Caroline has a status password must change. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this code, you can easily throw that into Google to figure out what it means, but basically it means that Caroline's password is babystart123, but it has been expired, it's past the expiration limit, hence what expired means, or it is being forced to change by a system administrator. But the babystart123 password is actually still valid, and we can actually change it for Caroline on her behalf using a tool called SMB password. So we use SMB password and specify the Caroline user, and then we have to specify the IP address of the machine, and then when the old password prompt is indicated, we just put in baby start 123 with a exclamation point, and then we can type any new password in here. Now there is a password policy in Active Directory set by the system administrator. So as long as you follow that, it should be fine. Now in actual engagements, probably not smart to do this without permission. You don't want to change users' credentials ever without permissions. But in a CTF or lab, it is completely fine. Now that I have a valid password for a user, I want to actually verify that I can authenticate to a service with them. So I'm going to check that the new password I set for Caroline, which is test123, is valid. And it is using SMB. Now I want to check if Caroline has WinRM authentication on the machine, which basically means I can use Evo WinRM to authenticate to the machine. As we see from the cracked map exec output, Caroline.Robinson test123 is pwned with WinRM, which means I can then use a tool called Evo WinRM to actually start a session using Caroline. After sending the command, which is super simple, nothing special there, we see I actually get a working shell as Caroline under Documents. It's time to update our mind map again. So we were able to use LDAP using LDAP search to identify passwords and usernames. Using that, we were able to identify a user that needed to reset their password, which we were able to do so using SMB passwd. And then after we reset the password, we identified that they did have WinRM permission, which gave us low privilege access on the account. Back to hacking. So looking at the groups that we're part of as Caroline on the machine, we identify we are part of the SE backup operators, which gives us access to save the SAM and system files. If you're unfamiliar with SAM and system, they are basically the Etsy shadow of Windows, where the SAM file is the actual passwords and the system/security file is the encryption key. So using the two files, we can actually decrypt NTLM hashes, which we can use to authenticate to the Windows machine. So I'm just going to use regsave to save the SAM and system file locally to Caroline as desktop. And then after that, I will actually be setting up a SMB server to transfer over these files. Now, you can use Evo WinRM's download functionality, but it's pretty slow, as in really slow. So I'd highly recommend just to use Impacket's SMB server. As I do here, as I was just setting up examples, SMB server, always make sure to enable SMB2 support. As I show here, SMB2 support, and then I just set the directory name and the path for it. Then I just grab my IP, and I will then move the items over using PowerShell. So to do this, I will just be using the move item PowerShell and use literal path to make sure that I don't have to specify the full path of the system.save or the sam.save, and then I'll transfer it over to my SMB server, which is running on my local machine, so I will be receiving it there. Now this still does take some time. It's faster than the Evo WinRM download, but it does take a few minutes, or a few seconds rather, to complete for the size of these items. So once these are then saved, I will be switching back over to my local machine, and I'll be going to the path that I created for the SMB server, and I see my sam.save and system.save. So now I'll be using Impacket's secrets dump to actually dump the hashes using these two files. So I'll be using sam.save and system.save as such, and then I mess up here and I have to include local at the end of it just to say I'm dumping my local stuff. And now I see I get the administrator hash 8D992 ending in B43. So with that, I can then try using Evo WinRM to get up to the machine as administrator. But as I'll show here in 1 second, that actually doesn't work. And that's because this is actually a domain controller. So on a domain controller, user authentication data is stored in the ntds.dit file and not in the SAM file. The SAM file is mostly irrelevant almost for domain accounts, since the domain controller relies on ntds database for password hashes. So we're going to need to actually steal the ntds.dit file to do so. Now we can do this by creating a shadow copy of the C directory. And the reason we have to create a shadow directory is because we can't actually access the ntds file while it's in use, and since the domain controller is running and Active Directory is active, it's always in use. So we have to create a shadow copy of the domain controller. So to do so, we are going to create a .dsh file, and we're going to input a few things into it. Now we're going to set context persistent, and that just means we're keeping it persistent and we want this to always run. And we're going to add a volume C with an alias of user. Then we're going to expose that to the Z drive. Now that will allow us to access the ntds file on the Z drive. Next, it's a simple Unix to DOS, converting it to a DOS format so we can actually execute it on a Windows machine. And then back over on the Windows machine, I use the upload functionality of evilwinrm. Since it's only a 4-line file, it won't take very long to use evilwinrm instead of the SMB server to actually upload the file. So I quickly upload it after getting the path correctly. After uploading, I then mess around a bit and find out that it's not possible to execute it under the desktop, so I have to actually move it to the temp directory. After moving it to the temp directory, I then create the shadow copy, and then I create a robocopy of ntds.dit from the Z drive to save to the temp directory. Once it's saved, I simply transfer it back over using the SMB server I had previously set up. Now finally, I dump it using ntds.dit file and the system file, and then I grab the hash of the administrator and use it to evilwinrm up. And then I am the administrator on the domain controller, and I have successfully pwned the machine. Now this was a pretty easy machine. It didn't require too much knowledge of Active Directory. All you had to know was LDAP and the SE backup operation for the privilege escalation, but I think it serves as a really good introductory of how to start as an unauthenticated user on Active Directory and move your way up throughout the network.